And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, and as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today in partnership with our friends at the Washington Examiner, and of course, to be doing what we can to be making sense out of nonsense, just as the great Biff Gore sang. Bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, sang style, day in and day out. Great program today. Tiana Lowe from the Washington Examiner, commentary writer, will join us to talk about a number of different news items from this week. Some interesting stories about the timing of former President Barack Obama endorsing Joe Biden for president, as well as some of the other factors that have been in play through some of the coronavirus issues with the states, like Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan and how she has handled her, I think it's beyond draconian. Some of the things I'm hearing sound like tyrannical decisions on the part of the governor of Michigan. So we'll talk about those different topics and more with Tiana Lowe of the Washington Examiner today. We're also going to be rejoined here on Jimmy at the Crossroads by Bazzel Baz. Baz was on the first 4 seasons of The Blacklist on NBC, starring James Spader, one of my absolute favorite shows. I love watching that program. Every Friday, I am a loyal viewer. And Baz was on it as the lead paramilitary guy for Raymond Reddington for the first 4 seasons, but he actually has an extensive background, having spent years as an officer in the CIA around the globe. He's an ex-Marine, a Citadel graduate. He also runs and founded the Association for the Recovery of Children. We're going to talk with him about these reports that have been coming out now in the Washington Post that coronavirus may well have been generated in a lab in Wuhan, China. That's a big story. We will talk about it with former CIA guy Bazzel Baz here on the show. We will also be joined by Dr. Tom Krannawitter to talk about something that I think so many Americans have lost sight of, and that is what individual rights actually are. What is a right? How are they derived? How are rights derived for human beings? And how does that discussion of individual rights fit in to the coronavirus pandemic that we are now facing today as a nation and as a society? We will talk about that with Dr. Tom Krannawitter of Speakeasy Ideas, where he is president. Just a fascinating guy, constitutional scholar, and also is a former professor at both Colorado Christian University and Hillsdale College. So Tom Krannawitter will join us later. But first, there are a few things I want to get in here on the show, and I want to follow up on yesterday's opening monologue where I was very critical of President Trump for his discussion about total authority. and the idea that the President of the United States has total authority, particularly in the coronavirus crisis, but also more broadly than that. So in cut 7, I want to play the president yesterday at his press conference clarifying his actual view, which is much more, the words he used yesterday are much more in step with what the president has been doing policy-wise prior to his statement about total authority the other day.
You mentioned that you're going to be speaking with all the governors
Yes.
tomorrow, make recommendations.
On probably Thursday.
On Thursday. What if they don't listen to you or take your advice or obey you? Will you consider taking away their federal funding?
I don't want to say that. They'll listen. They'll be fine. I think we're going to have a good relationship. They need the federal government, not only for funding, and I'm not saying take it away, but they need it for advice. They'll need maybe equipment that we have. We have a tremendous stockpile that we're in the process of completing. We're in a very good position. Again, the cupboard was bare when I got here. Nobody ever thought a thing, in all fairness to previous administrations, nobody ever thought anything like this was going to happen, but it did happen. No, the governors will be very, very respectful of the presidency. Again, this isn't me, this is the presidency. The presidency has such a great importance in terms of what we're doing. And you can talk about Constitution, you can talk about federalism, you can talk about whatever you want, but the best way, I'm talking now from a managerial standpoint, is to let individual governors run individual states and come to us if they have difficulty, and we will help them.
So that's President Trump laying down in words what his policy has already been. So I wanted to make that clear because it's important for him to clarify and make that distinction. And again, it's in step with the actual policies that he's been moving forward with, including not forcing a nationwide quarantine as some have been clamoring for. But yesterday, Donald Trump was not the only president of the United States or former president, somebody to hold the office of president to address the nation or to present opinions on anything. Barack Obama endorsed Joe Biden yesterday. We'll talk about the timing of that and more with Tiana Lowe in the next segment. But I want to hit at a couple of points because what I saw last night in Obama's speech was the same kind of sanctimonious, self-righteous language that Barack Obama, in my view, has always been known for. Let's go to cut 4 here. This is Barack Obama blasting the Republican Party.
Because one thing everybody has learned by now is that the Republicans occupying the White House and running the U.S. Senate are not interested in progress. They're interested in power. They've shown themselves willing to kick millions off their health insurance and eliminate pre-existing condition protections for millions more, even in the middle of this public health crisis, even as they're willing to spend $1 trillion on tax cuts for the wealthy. They've given polluters unlimited power to poison our air and our water and denied the science of climate change, just as they denied the science of pandemics. Repeatedly, they've disregarded American principles of rule of law and voting rights and transparency, basic norms that previous administrations observed regardless of party, principles that are the bedrock of our democracy. So our country's future hangs on this election.
That was Barack Obama acting like the end of the world will come if Donald Trump is reelected, but also saying Republicans denied the science of pandemics, which is a blatantly partisan and political line from a president who I thought was going to seem like he's going above the fray and that's what he was going to do, is help paint Joe Biden as somebody who's not going to just play political games, and that Barack Obama is going to come in there and he's going to speak the truth, but he's not going to malign the other side. And I don't just mean malign President Trump, but malign the other side. But he did exactly that. And then one more clip I want to react to is cut 5. This is former President Barack Obama talking a little bit about propaganda network of Fox News and about what matters.
The other side has a massive war chest. The other side has a propaganda network with little regard for the truth. On the other hand, pandemics have a way of cutting through a lot of noise and spin to remind us of what is real and what is important. This crisis has reminded us that government matters. It's reminded us that good government matters, that facts and science matter, that the rule of law matters, that having leaders who are informed and honest and seek to bring
matters. That's the talking point that we're hearing from many on the left day in and day out, has been this idea: facts matter, this matters, truth matters, that matters. And notice how everything that matters, they have a monopoly on. Barack Obama, who was all-knowing and all-powerful when he was head of the federal government, Barack Obama knows what matters. And if you disagree with him, you disagree with what matters. His interpretation of the truth, his interpretation of the facts. If you disagree with that, you don't get what matters. You're not for what matters. And the notion of Fox News, which is what he was alluding to as a propaganda network, Fox is not a new enemy to Barack Obama. Beckett Adams at the Washington Examiner in September of 2018 had a very interesting commentary writing the following about President Obama and the way in which he approached the media, specifically Fox News. When it comes to being anti-media, Trump only talks a big game, and boy, does he talk. Obama, on the other hand, is a man of action. As president, he did much more than complain about Fox News. His administration spent 8 years long curbing the press freedoms of journalists of every stripe. Obama was a pro at this. In 2009, for example, the Obama White House intentionally excluded Fox News' Chris Wallace from participating in a round of interviews pertaining to the president's push for health care reform. Later that same year, the administration officials tried to block Fox reporters from interviewing pay czar Kenneth Feinberg. The White House initially lied about this, and many in the press went along with it. It wasn't until 2011 that the public learned the truth about the Feinberg episode. An internal email dated October 22, 2009, showed the White House director of broadcast media told Treasury officials specifically, "We'd prefer if you skip Fox, please." The Obama White House communications director, Anita Dunn, said at the time, "We're going to treat them the way we would treat an opponent. As they are undertaking a war against Barack Obama and the White House, we don't need to pretend that this is the way that legitimate news organizations behave." And this is the most striking one, as Beckett Adams writes in the Washington Examiner in 2018. In 2010, the Obama administration renewed the bogus Bush-era subpoena against the New York Times' James Risen in a prolonged attempt to determine whether the reporter was the recipient of leaked CIA information. And in February 2011, federal investigators were revealed to have spied on Risen. Federal investigators pored over Risen's credit reports and his personal bank records. The feds even tracked his phone logs and movements. We saw James Rosen of the Fox News Channel in 2013 investigated by the Obama Justice Department, which labeled him a criminal co-conspirator under the Espionage Act of 1917. I could go on here, but particularly Fox News, as well as some other media opponents, Barack Obama actually used some teeth, whereas Donald Trump just speaks words and does it occasionally in a rude way. I will say that. But he hasn't done the kinds of things that Barack Obama and his administration did, spying on opponents, labeling them co-conspirators, and those opponents were just people in the media. So of course he believes Fox News is a propaganda outlet because Fox News gave a voice to his opposition for 8 years. And of course he's not going to acknowledge that CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, and the rest are liberal media outlets that are against the President of the United States, Donald Trump, day in and day out, and for the Democrats day in and day out. That is the real Barack Obama, and let us not lose sight of that as he gets out on the virtual campaign trail, perhaps more and more, and campaigns for Joe Biden. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You are watching Jimmy at the Crossroads, here in partnership with the Washington Examiner. In just moments, we will talk with Tiana Lowe of the Washington Examiner about some stories of the day. But first, a message from the President of the United States.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. Well, Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
Crikey, that was the biggest bloody mosquito I've ever seen. Wait, coming in. Oh, good day, mate. You know, after a long day of kangarangling and croc roping, a man can really work up an appetite. Not to mention a whopper of a backache. I know a place, and that's why I like coming into the Back Out Steakhouse. The Back Out is the only place I know where you can sit down in a lumbar support Barca lounger and enjoy a big juicy bandicoot steak or a thick koala chop served by a licensed chiropractor. And as you partake of your meal, your server will provide you with a spinal manipulation, neck twist, the hip alignment, the full Matilda. One visit to the Back Out Steakhouse and your spirits will return like an Abbo's boomerang. So the next time your back goes on walkabout and you're coincidentally, simultaneously craving a slab of cooked meat, waltz on into the Back Out Steakhouse. You not only feel good down under, but all over. Back Out Steakhouse! Good stuff, eh, Skippy? Bloody boomerangs. Back Out Steakhouse!
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Welcome back on this, Wednesday, April 15th. It's Wednesday, which must mean Washington Examiner Wednesday. And in just a moment, I will introduce our first guest of the day. But first, let's play Barack Obama yesterday in Cut 1, endorsing former Vice President Joe Biden for President of the United States. Looks like Nathan hasn't had that queued up quite yet. There we go. All right, he's got it up. Lickety-split.
I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, and he became a close friend. And I believe Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now. Joe was there as we rebuilt from the Great Recession and rescued the American auto industry. He was the one asking what every policy would do for the middle class, and everyone's striving to get into the middle class. That's why I asked him to implement the Recovery Act, which saved millions of jobs and got people back on their feet. Because Joe gets stuff done. Joe helped me manage H1N1 and prevent the Ebola epidemic from becoming the type of pandemic we're seeing now. He helped me restore America's standing and leadership in the world on the other threats of our time, like nuclear proliferation and climate change. Joe has the character and the experience to guide us through one of our darkest times and heal us through a long recovery. I could not
That's
be
a
prouder
little
of
bit
the
of Barack
incredible progress.
Obama yesterday. Last night, Barack Obama endorsing Joe Biden for president. A shocker, to be sure. But what about the timing of this? Was that notable? Is this sensible timing? Is there something off about it, perhaps? Let's talk about that and more with Tiana Lowe, who is a commentary writer at the Washington Examiner and joins us right now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Tiana, hello. How are you? Looks like we had a freeze here with the Skype for some reason. We're working on that. Nathan Matoush working the Matoush magic here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and the magic will happen. Barack Obama, it is striking. So Bernie Sanders endorses Joe Biden first, and then Joe Biden gets endorsed by Barack Obama the next day. Now, it's somewhat peculiar, because when we look at the timing here, you're like, well, wouldn't you want to space it out? But maybe on the other hand, there are other reasons for this and why we are seeing the Obama endorsement happen just yesterday. Okay, it looks like now we have our guest. Tiana Lowe is a commentary writer at the Washington Examiner, and she joins us now. Tiana, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. We appreciate the time. So let me jump right to it. The timing, you wrote a little piece curious about why now. Why is it now that Barack Obama endorsed Joe Biden last night after Bernie Sanders had done so? What piques your interest about that?
So we already knew that Obama wanted the next person to carry on the mantle of his legacy, be someone more intersectional. It's the reason why he asked Joe Biden to sit out the 2016 election. He genuinely thought that Hillary could win. And what better way to top off the legacy of the first black president with the first woman president? We already know that the establishment was not super enthusiastic about Joe Biden from the get-go. They thought he's old, which he is, and they probably thought he wasn't progressive enough. This is why time after time, Biden did take all the hits. You know, he was smeared at the beginning of this campaign as being creepy with women, something that I think anyone with eyes has seen for the last 3 decades. And then the establishment really let Kamala Harris go forward with this attack about forced federally mandated busing, something that hasn't been litigated in 30 years. And now that they realize that he's the only one who can beat Trump or can even get to this race, now they kind of have to. Honestly, I think that Obama intentionally timed this so that way there wasn't really too much attention on it. Think about it. This is someone who performs far better in rallies and in real life than just behind a camera. And yet he chose the moment in which people care the least to endorse him.
What about the idea, though? I was talking to a leftist friend last night who said Obama had to do it now to get it out of the way. Otherwise, there would be a lot of questions about, is he going to endorse Biden? When is that actually going to happen? And this way, he got it out of the way, and then maybe if he wants to come back and do more of a splash at a later point, he can do that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing where Obama will really matter will be donations. Right now, I mean, the Trump campaign is reporting record fundraising hauls, and Biden's budget is pretty anemic right now. Barack Obama is an excellent fundraiser, but the main issue will be, can Obama successfully clinch Obama to Trump counties for Biden? Remember, Hillary Clinton only lost the election because of 80,000 voters in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. If Obama could get those back, Trump could be in real trouble here.
I want to play cut two. This is President Obama in his speech last night, a message to Biden supporters endorsing Biden. He praised the Democrats, but made an interesting point of emphasis about Bernie Sanders, who just the night before endorsed Biden.
Each of our candidates were talented and decent, with a track record of accomplishment, smart ideas, and serious visions for the future. And that's certainly true of the candidate who made it farther than any other, Bernie Sanders. Bernie's an American original, a man who has devoted his life to giving voice to working people's hopes, dreams, and frustrations. He and I haven't always agreed on everything, but we've always shared a conviction that we have to make America a fairer, more just, more equitable society. We both know that nothing is more powerful than millions of voices calling for change. And the ideas he's championed, the energy and enthusiasm he inspired, especially in young people, will be critical in moving America in a direction of progress and hope. Because for the second time in 12 years, we'll have the incredible task of rebuilding our economy. And to meet the moment, the Democratic Party will have to be bold.
Now, Tiana Lowe, clearly a lot of Bernie supporters are not too thrilled with Joe Biden being the nominee. And this was a direct play by Barack Obama to them to say, hey, if you're a Bernie supporter, we support Bernie too, at least in certain ways, and we're glad to have him on board. Join us as well. What did you make of that portion of Obama's talk last night? Once again, it looks like we have a frozen connection there. Sometimes bandwidth issues can kick in. We're working on that, getting it sorted back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Hey, this happens with Skype sometimes, and we will have her back here in just one moment. It was striking, of course, seeing Barack Obama make a direct play to Bernie Sanders supporters and saying to them, look, you need to get on board. We share a lot of Bernie's values and principles as well. So we have Tiana back here. Tiana, what did you make of Barack Obama's direct play to Bernie Sanders supporters by saying this is what's great about Bernie and we like him too?
So I think that a lot of Democrats are still shell-shocked by 2016, how ugly that divorce was between Sanders and Clinton. You did have delegates from California, from Washington, who stormed out of the convention hall while Hillary Clinton was giving her acceptance speech for the nomination because they were so livid by the treatment of Bernie Sanders. This time, the DNC really did roll out the red carpet for Bernie. There was not the same level of institutional mishandling of this election. Biden won fair and square, and quite frankly, he locked up the nomination with a lot more confidence than Hillary Clinton did. That being said, I think that everyone understands that if they can successfully get Bernie to fall in line, it really takes the wind out of the sails of the squad. And the establishment has made no secret of the fact that they can't stand AOC, they can't stand Ilhan Omar. And if Bernie, the once and future hope of the socialist left in the country, if he's willing to back Biden, then it's going to look really dumb if the squad and if the far left tries to issue a never Biden movement. It's pretty strong, and it's easy to offer these conciliatory gestures without actually doing anything. And the question just remains is how to toe the line of not peeving Bernie and his supporters without also undercutting the very case that Biden is a good candidate because he is moderate.
Tiana Lowe, again, our guest. She is a commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We haven't talked about on this program yet, but there's been a sex assault allegation leveled against Joe Biden that the media has not been giving the Kavanaugh treatment on. And I've been noticing this. I've seen a lot of, speaking of Bernie Sanders supporters have been highlighting this story, and the media's absolute absence of coverage of this, of Biden, and instead, in fact, the New York Times did a story this week that basically downplayed these allegations in a way that I don't think would have happened if it was a Republican that had them leveled against them. So what did you make of that? What do you make of this story and the way in which media are approaching it?
So a sensible standard, one that I think kind of got discarded with the whole case of Brett Kavanaugh, is to consider, is it more likely than not true, an allegation? What does the evidence say that it's more likely than not that this thing actually did happen? with this specific one against Biden,
I think we just wait for a moment, Nathan Matoush. For some reason, she's cutting in and out again. Bandwidth issues going on here, it appears, as we are on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Here and there, again, that can happen. But it is interesting, more likely than not that it's true, that kind of a standard. You have to look at the evidence. You have to look at the facts and what is all presented in that regard. So that certainly is what we'll get to in just a moment here as Nathan plugs the connection back into the software here. Pretty lickety split, though, with that. So occasionally these bandwidth issues happen. Tiana, please go ahead and restart your comment.
I'm so sorry. So if you look at what the evidence is, so Tara Reid, the accuser, so she says that there are basically three different people kind of corroborating a story. The issue with this corroboration is that it's not comprehensive corroboration of sexual assault. It is corroboration of Biden weirdly touching her neck and of Biden maybe being sexist. But these are all things we already knew. That's not a game changer. The game changer is whether or not this was an outright sexual assault. So her brother is one of the supposed witnesses, and he has changed his story to the Washington Post. So he's not a very credible corroboration. There's one unnamed friend who corroborates an allegation of harassment, and it seems like there's only one person corroborating assault, but even so, the details are really murky. Not only is the source unnamed, but they aren't directly quoted. So in this case, it is fully possible that Biden harassed her, and obviously it's possible he assaulted her, but just not one person from Biden's former Senate office at the time corroborates any such thing happening. And also, people don't like to admit it, but consistency does matter. There is no other allegation of this nature against Joe Biden. And quite frankly, this should be the death of the Kavanaugh standard. This should reinforce that evidence does matter and that we must take these accusations seriously and that they are worth investigating. But the evidence just does not meet the preponderance right now.
But the biggest, the most significant thing I see looking at the story is what you said. It was very well put, but this is not how the media approached Kavanaugh.
No, not at all. I mean, as Kavanaugh said at the time, the Sweatnik thing was a total farce, gang rapes. Are you kidding me? And then the Deborah Ramirez one, after the New York Times authors who wrote that book that came out last fall, they showed where all the actual corroboration was. Every single person listed in the room where he allegedly whipped it out and exposed himself, they deny this ever happening. And there is basically one unnamed source who claims that they heard from a stranger something of this nature happening. The only allegation that had a veneer of credibility was the Christine Blasey Ford one, and that one also fell apart upon speculation. I would never say she was lying. There's no evidence that she was lying, but it is possible that she mis-ID'd Kavanaugh, considering that every single person she says was at this party where this alleged assault happened denies this ever happening, including her close personal friend. And yet, it was immediately, Democrats made clear at the start they were going to stop Kavanaugh at all costs. And in doing so, they might have blown up the Me Too movement.
Double standard, to be sure. Let's shift gears now. We're amidst this coronavirus crisis. Tiana Lowe, again, commentary writer at the Washington Examiner, our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And there have been different approaches taken by governors across the country. Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan is one of them that I think this has gone beyond some of the draconian policies of some governors to tyrannical in many respects. You had a great piece for the Examiner this week on Whitmer and how she has been handling this as governor of Michigan. What's she been doing? What do you make of it? Once again, it looks like our guest is frozen there. We're working on it. See, the nice thing is that Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic, is able to very quickly get her back here as we can with any of the guests. Things just move smoothly in terms of that particular process. So we're on top of it here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, again, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Engaging intelligent talk, saying style, day in and day out. So, one thing that I'm noticing, and Nathan's got to work before you put it on the screen here. We are, just to get a message to Tiana, we are showing that you are sideways right now. So we want to fix, there we go. Everything's looking good. Okay, Let's jump in. We're working through it here. See, this is the nice thing about live streaming, especially in the COVID-19 era, where everybody is on the internet. They're doing all these things. It's streaming. It's happening in real time. Okay, Governor Whitmer of Michigan. Tell us.
I prefer to call her Governor Karen, who's really leaned into her authoritarian streak here.
Very much so.
A good comparison is California as a case study. 2 Democratic governors, both considered rising stars within the party. And I'm from California, and I had a very negative opinion of Gavin Newsom before this. That has changed dramatically. So California got its first coronavirus case in January. Michigan didn't get their first coronavirus case until March 10th. Michigan has a population 1/4 of the size, and California is home to the second densest city in the country, San Francisco. And somehow Michigan has more deaths and more cases than California. Why? Because Gretchen Whitmer was late to shut down schools. She was late to shut down the economy. And now, as a result, she's overcorrecting with these draconian measures, banning stores from selling gardening supplies, banning Michiganders from traveling in between their own residences. And the thing is, it just makes no sense simply because Michigan is not California. Plenty of people are capable of going from one home, getting in their car, driving to another without ever coming into contact with another human being. So it just shows, it reeks of desperation. We all get it. She's trying to audition to be Joe Biden's vice president, but I think she just threw the audition.
Well, this is exactly why she shouldn't be vice president, because, as you're saying, she overcorrected, and that's a nice way of putting it, by the way. I mean, in Michigan, it is required under the law that if you have a child under 4 years old that they ride in a car seat. But you go to Walmart, I've seen the photos, you go to Walmart and you cannot buy a car seat for your child to comply with another law in the state that, by the way, was a law actually passed by the state legislature and signed by a governor, as opposed to this one, which is just an edict of an overzealous governor.
Absolutely. And right now, you can't. So Whitmer went on Twitter responding to Meghan McCain, who rightly grilled her over the coals for this. And she claimed that the car seat ban was the store's misunderstanding what was banned. But these stores are terrified. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to get shut down. So if you write a law that is unclear in terms of what a store can and cannot do, they will overcorrect as a result as well. And that's what's happening in Michigan. And you can't blame, we have these store workers, they're working 12-hour days. They're risking it all to help us, to make sure that we have supplies that we need. Don't blame them. Blame the fact that you wrote a bad bill.
I think that's very well put and very succinctly so. Tiana Lowe, before we let you go, a final question for you, and that is, President Trump has just announced his council for the recovery effort and putting people, a whole group of executives and others, a couple hundred people, I think, on this list of advisors for the economic policies amidst all this. And you wrote this week about Jamie Dimon and what role you think he should play. Why did you emphasize Dimon, and did your goal or your wish become accomplished?
So there are essentially 2 winners of the 2008 financial crisis, and it was Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon the federal government essentially turned to him in 2008 and begged him to acquire Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual. If he had not done so, the economic catastrophe would have been monumental. But he did it anyway, picking up, I think it was like a $16 billion legal tab as a result, because of all the lawsuits that those 2 companies face. But he did it anyway. And JP Morgan Chase, they've had the fewest liquidity issues over the past decade. And even for coronavirus, they put aside billions of dollars in cash reserves because they understood that we were going to face a credit crunch. As a result, they've been able to give out double the amount of loan extensions to companies that they did in 2008. That's the sort of thinking Trump needs. Trump will obviously need people with manufacturing backgrounds, people with supply chain backgrounds. But JP Morgan Chase is the largest market cap in the world, and it's essentially because of Jamie Dimon's expertise. So this is one where Trump's thrown barbs at him on Twitter, but they already have kind of a working relationship because Dimon was on that initial economic advisory team that included Elon Musk and so on in 2017. So bring him back. I just don't think anyone really wants Jared and Ivanka within 5 feet of this.
You may be right about that last part in this regard especially, but In terms of Diamond, sure, he was able to do some things back in 2008 and with that crisis, although I would say that the credit situation that we're seeing right now is very different because these are companies that weren't necessarily floundering prior to the coronavirus crisis, yet are now having credit issues because they don't have customers buying their products and services. But a very interesting points. Definitely be sure to check out Tiana Lowe's writings in the commentary section for the Washington Examiner. Great to have you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks so much, Tiana, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for all the technical difficulties.
You know, it's a brave new COVID world, and we appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, Tiana Lowe with the Washington Examiner joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Coming up, we've got another great guest. I'm looking forward to bringing back onto the show Bazzel Baz. Now, Baz, of course, is an actor who was on the first 4 seasons of The Blacklist, one of my absolute favorite shows on NBC. But the reason why he got his role as Raymond Reddington's paramilitary leader is because, well, in real life, Baz was in the CIA for many years. Also, ex-Marine Corps. He is a phenomenal guy, fascinating insights. We're going to talk about what's happening with China and this lab in Wuhan that may have been the source for the virus generated there. Keep it right here. It's Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hill Avenue and Dan Strait Street.
Now, I want to introduce to you my phenomenal partner on this resolution, the great Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Oh, beautiful.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to all of my colleagues here that have joined us today. This is so incredible. This is such a major watershed moment, and I am so incredibly excited that we are going to transition this country into the future, and we are not going to be dragged behind by our past.
I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and folks, we don't need some godforsaken, government-orchestrated Green New Deal to protect the environment and combat climate change. No, we need to unleash innovation through the free market. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey, the lead sponsors of the so-called Green New Deal in Congress, won't tell you this. The mainstream media won't tell you this. But the reality is that carbon dioxide emissions in the United States in recent years have been on a downward trend. Yes, a downward trend. For example, in 2017, the USA cut our carbon dioxide emissions by about the same amount as the entire European Union increased theirs. This is remarkable, especially since 2017 was the same year that President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. Not only that, but China and India are by far the biggest drivers in carbon dioxide output in the world. But what has led this revolution in the United States of reducing carbon dioxide emissions? Well, it has been the revolution in innovation. That is, the private sector has truly brought about some incredible gains in technological improvements that have resulted in this dramatic decline in carbon dioxide emissions. That's particularly, for example, with the production of oil and natural gas through increases in the technological innovations of fracking or hydraulic fracturing.
So for me, this is kind of like Groundhog Day. I'm experiencing all the same outrage and all the same predictions of apocalypse and the world is coming to an end and all the rest of it. And you know what happened when George Bush pulled out of the Kyoto Treaty? In the next 14 years, we reduced our emissions by 18%. We reduced our emissions faster than the European countries that are now criticizing Donald Trump. Our emissions right now are at 1992 levels. And it's not because of a treaty. It's not because of some piece of parchment signed in Paris or Kyoto. It's because of the free market economy, innovation, and technology. It's hydraulic fracking. It's all of these clean coal technologies that are reducing our emissions.
The reality is that the private sector has been driving these dramatic improvements in technology that has reduced carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, it is the free market that has been driving forward with combating climate change. If this is happening, and it has been happening, what we really need is to unleash more of the unlimited potential of the private sector, of the free market, of each and every individual, because that is the pathway to defeating climate change and really saving the planet, not through some government scheme. The Millennial Policy Center just came out with some great research on how we can fix environmental problems and combat climate change through the free market. To learn more, log on to millennialpolicycenter.org.
Jimmy Sengenberger.
Rocking and rolling back on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be here day in and day out, bringing engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. By the way, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Jimmy at the Crossroads. You can go to youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Plus, on Facebook, we're live. So you can go to Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, like it there, and either on Facebook, on that page, or on the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, you can watch the show live as well as past videos and more content up at both places. So lots to do there. And please, by the way, follow our friends at the Washington Examiner, DC Examiner on Twitter, youtube.com/Washington Examiner on YouTube, and then also Washington Examiner on their page on Facebook. So lots going on in the world today, and I've been following for weeks now, some theories bandied about that the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus that we are now seeing as a pandemic here in the United States and across the globe, was actually generated at a lab in Wuhan, China. And now even the Washington Post is in on the action. Zero Hedge, a financial news website, had originally put this out there, and it got them blocked on Twitter, banned from Twitter as a result of putting out an article on this. Then Fox News' Tucker Carlson recently took it. I saw an article in the National Review, and now Josh Rogan at the Washington Post has picked up this story talking about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which in 2015 became China's first laboratory to achieve the highest level of international bioresearch safety, they say. And now it appears that maybe, just maybe, the virus was generated at this lab in Wuhan, China, and not from human beings eating bats at the wet markets. Let's talk about this with my friend, former, maybe future, actor on the Blacklist for his awesome character of Baz. He was, for many years, in the CIA as an officer, as well as in the Marine Corps, also a graduate of the Citadel, and the president-founder of the Association for the Recovery of Children. Bazzel Baz rejoins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Baz, my friend, welcome back. It's good to talk with you today.
Jimmy, it's always good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me this morning in the midst of the national crisis.
Indeed. Well, I appreciate it. That's exactly where I wanted to go to you. First of all, how are you doing amidst everything?
Doing great. Doing great.
Bazzel Baz cutting in and out just a little bit there with the connection today. We'll see how he's getting picked back up again. Baz joining us here on the show.
Good.
Baz, it looks like you're cutting in
we
and
go.
out,
Looks
my
like
friend. Yeah. Okay. I think you're
Okay,
better
back?
now.
Okay.
We're just having some bandwidth issues here today. All right. So let's see if we can jump right into this topic of conversation. The Washington Post, now the latest outlet to talk about China and this Wuhan lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology as a potential place where this was not just studied, but this was actually created. What do you make of these reports?
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. I actually just got off the phone with my sources in Washington, D.C., having the same discussion. I think it's a couple of things we have to look at, Jimmy, is number one, who has the motive and would take the opportunity to do something like this. And so far, all the reports that are coming in, not just through the media, but through intelligence resources, are showing that indeed it would be China. If you study Song Soo, excuse me, one of the rules of war is to win without fighting. And if we take a look at the fact that President Trump has really been on the backs of China for, well, at least the last 3 years, we know, really hard, you know that China doesn't like that. And if you take a look at the fact that most of the world realizes that China is everywhere. I mean, Chinese are everywhere, and they produce products that get distributed all over the world. Most of the world sees China as an economic ally to some degree, without remembering that China, a communist country, is actually not our ally. But we've kind of compromised a little bit with our relations with them, except for when the president was elected and he realized the potential of what China could do. If you look at China's, and I'm just using this word, China's invasion of I guess it's Pronto, Italy, and other places.
Bazzel Baz, our guest, cutting just in and out a little bit here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, of course. Let's just try to power through it.
Yeah,
see Nathan, how it's working. You're cut in and out again, Baz, so please go ahead.
Sorry about that. How are we doing so far? Is that good?
I think it's better right now.
All right. So it's in the interest of the Chinese to slow America down. Now, proving it is going to be a little harder, but they are just as evil enough to do it. And in the intel community, with what we're discovering, of course, a lot of that would not be able to be distributed to the public right away. The Chinese know that we are limited by our response to a direct bio attack. We're certainly not going to drop a nuke on them, because then, of course, we would create war. And the Chinese also know that within the U.S. political system, that the president has opposition here. And that opposition, I say sadly, because I wish our nation wasn't divided this way, as with the Democratic Party and globalists. And so they kind of know that if they could just throw a wrench in the works a little bit, that what we would see in the United States as far as disruptions was concerned would be exactly that, enough to slow the United States down, preoccupy the president when it comes to dealing with China as heavy-handed as he had. And, keep in mind, Jimmy, the president is the one that said, let's shut down the economy. He's trying not to do that. It was he's dealt with the World Health Organization on certain levels. And so the Chinese, they have leverage, and what the conversations that most of America aren't privy to are the conversations behind closed doors. And by the way, I have it on good authority that these are heated conversations with the Chinese basically saying, hey, guess what? Want to play that way? We're not going to ship you any more masks. Hey, remember those soybeans that we were going to buy out of Iowa? Well, we're not going to buy those anyway. And
See,
Yeah,
Baz,
go ahead.
let me jump in for a moment, because while I understand that China in many ways is an enemy of the United States, or at the very least an adversary, and I've never looked at them as as an ally in an economic context. I've looked at them as a trading partner, so to speak, in the sense that we have companies that exchange goods with China and people in China and here into the United States and so forth. And so I've been an opponent of the trade war from the start, particularly because I believe that China had a lot of leverage in these areas. And I think that one of the challenges with the approach that President Trump did in terms of unilaterally going after China as opposed to building a coalition of other countries that certainly have been taken advantage of in certain ways by the Chinese when it comes to trade. Instead, he went unilaterally. And one of the challenges with that is it actually diminished American leverage in certain areas, and I think we would be in a stronger position vis-a-vis masks and other things at this point with a leverage situation if the president had taken a more strategic approach in terms of his China trade war.
Well, it may have, Jimmy, but think about this. America has to understand this. The Chinese, and excuse my French, the Chinese have us by the balls. You know, most people don't know that the Chinese own almost every college and university in the United States. The Chinese, over the last 3 administrations, have been allowed to buy up America. And now you've got a president that comes in and is really hot on sovereignty and sustainability and trying to get the American people out of this bondage that we've been in, that's been created actually by the last 3 presidents, so to speak, and those administrations. And so he strategically used whatever he thought was best or started putting the pressure on. And the Chinese, basically what it's appearing to be, and again, we have to prove it, but it's the Chinese are basically saying, guess what? We are powerful, we have you by the balls, and we're going to show you exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to engineer this virus. We're going to distribute it all over Europe and all over the world. We're going to give people tickets that are infected, and we're going to fly them to these places, and we're going to create this havoc. And especially in the United States, because let me tell you something, the Chinese are really smart. They're evil, but they're really smart. And I don't mind saying that because in the agency, we have been fighting the espionage war against them for years. But they know that there's a conflict of vision in the United States. Some of us in the United States believe in maintaining the Constitution, and there are others that believe in dumping our sovereignty and basically becoming slaves to the global government or a global market. And it's not going to go away on its own. It's not. The Chinese are counting on this. And when you talk about the deep state, while the deep state, which is we know it's real, may not have been necessarily complicit in the crime, so to speak, by saying, hey, we're going to help you with this. What they are complicit when it comes to the crime is absolutely doing nothing. It's just step back and watch it unfold and let the president carry the full weight.
In terms of some of these individuals who say deep state or political opponents of the president or however you want to look at it, what they've been trying to do is squelch anybody in the administration or outside the administration who's trying to say, look, this came from China. Not even anything specific about a Wuhan lab or anything like that, but just that this came from China, or saying that it was the Chinese coronavirus or what have you. That was patently unacceptable even for them to hear, let alone highlighting exactly how, as we're learning now more and more, how this may have indeed been generated. But the story in the Washington Post is very interesting. The headline is, by the way, it's a column, which is fascinating here, by Josh Rogan, WAPO columnist. State Department cables warned of safety issues at Wuhan lab studying bat coronaviruses. This going back a couple of years. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, it looks like, has gotten federal grants from the federal government here in the United States. The idea being, we want to make sure that they're being safe in the lab, that we're upping the standards, because the Chinese are new to this kind of virology exposition and discovery and research and all of that. They're new to it, so we need to provide them funding to make sure it's done safely. But then here we go. This virus seems to have been created at the Wuhan lab. What do you make of the reports now coming out more and more? And then a moment ago, you used the word engineered. Now, the report in the Washington Post says that folks that he's talked to are saying There's not the evidence there yet that it's engineered intentionally, but that it was generated, it was created, but engineered, for example, with the intention of bioterrorism. So how do you look at the creation of this virus if indeed, as it appears, this was created at this Wuhan Institute of Virology and not something that came from bats to human beings and then to other human beings?
I think, once we continue to gather more intelligence, and I think I can safely say this, that there is enough intelligence already gathered that points the finger at China engineering this. When you engineer it, you ask yourself, for what purpose are you engineering this? Just to keep it in a lab? No. No one engineers biotechnology of this level of destruction without having some thought of how could we use this? Why do we need to have this so that we can use it in the future? We're not doing this for just, giggles, so to speak. That's not the way the Chinese have ever worked. And so I think the question to be asked is, once we do have all of the intelligence, and we will get it because there are people in the United States that were associated with the Chinese. There are companies in China, American companies in China, that may have assisted to some degree. Once those people are all rolled up and arrested, I think the question for America now is, just how pissed off are you at what the Chinese have done? If in fact it shows that they deliberately launched a bio attack on your country, an attack is an attack, then the question is, how do we retaliate, or what is the dialogue going to look like now with the Chinese? Are the Americans and the Europeans and all the other people going to say, fine, you think you're big enough? We're taking all our business to South America. We trust them a lot better. Can we do that? Is it going to be done? I don't know the answer to that yet, Jimmy, but these are questions that are being asked by some people at the highest levels of our government.
Now,
and
sure.
Based on the fact that they know it's going to come true.
Bazzel Baz is our guest, former CIA officer for a number of years, also Marine Corps veteran, and, of course, played Baz, coincidentally named Baz, on the Blacklist. Let's go ahead for just a moment and create a Blacklist episode, if you will, surrounding a virus creator in Wuhan. Let's maybe call it the virus maker. Just game it out for us for a moment.
Well, let's see. All of a sudden, intelligence possibly comes from of course, the FBI or the CIA. The CIA comes to the FBI on the Blacklist and says, we realize that bad people did this, and we know who those bad people are, and we know those bad people are going to do this again. And by the way, we discovered that maybe Red Reddington might know who the bad people are attached to. So the FBI calls up James Spader. He comes to their office and they say, here's the 5 primary Chinese scientists and bad guys in China that did this. But wait, James Spader says, no, it's not the only people. We've got an infection inside our own country. And so James Spader, from his old network of criminals or others, realizes that there are members of the deep state that carried on conversations with the Chinese.
You mean the cabal?
The cabal, exactly. So James Spader miraculously arranges a meeting again between the 5 Chinese bad guys and those bad members of the cabal. And they think that they're both speaking to each other to go have this great meeting in Geneva to get into phase 3 of how they can leverage the United States and bring down President Trump or whatever. And then once the 8 people are there, lo and behold, James Spader shows up, silencer on his weapon. He kills them all. Guess what? We never have to worry about a virus again. There you go, the Blacklist.
This is why, see, I should note, you weren't just an actor on the Blacklist for 4 seasons and hopefully more, but a writer and producer as well. So you could tell some of the creativity here. I got to run it in just a moment, but 2 final questions for you. One, since we were just talking about the Blacklist, is Baz really dead? Is he alive? What's going on here, man?
I'm going to have to call John Bokenkamp and ask him one of these days,
Do it! Let me know. Tip me off.
Mixed work on this. I don't know, but I can tell you this. The very Baz that you saw on the Blacklist is the very Baz that is still here in the United States of America to defend the country against the cabal.
Well, thank you. I appreciate what you're doing here, Ed, coming on here and sharing your insights. But finally, just a question about where we go from here as far as retaliation for this virus. It does seem like it was, at the very least, it was created in Wuhan from bad experiments. Maybe even worse than that, it was intentionally engineered by the Chinese government. Maybe we'll find out someday. But how do you think the United States may end up responding here?
Well, I think there's two things that the President of the United States, by the way, I think we have the right president in office in this time to be.
Occasionally, on the final question, things get cutting in and out a little bit once again. We've got Bazzel Baz on the show. He is, of course. Baz, you were just cutting out there. I think you're looking better here. Let's try again. Go ahead.
Okay, how's that? So the president has two things to deal with, Jimmy. He has to deal with the deep state in the United States and those Democratic governors who are doing everything they can to take advantage to disrupt that. And number two, I think if the Chinese or the world underestimates this president and this administration and thinking that this president will basically believe or say the Chinese have us by the balls, there's nothing we can do, I think they have another thing coming. I think he's got some cards up his sleeve. And I think the world has yet to see a president like this who actually would be willing to, I'm just speaking for me, just cut the ties with China and say, you guys, what do you think you got it? Guess what? You don't own our universities. You don't own our country. You can't even get it back from us. And guess what? We're not even paying you back for us. You know, you want to take deeper measures?
Let me jump into there, because Lindsey Graham suggested maybe you're talking about not paying back some of the debt we owe China, trillions of dollars in debt. The problem with that is then you have countries all across the globe that can just start deciding, debt is meaningless. Let's just go ahead and not pay back this country or that country. I think that there are a lot of second and third order effects, even if it is China, that could come from this, and you would probably end up having some kind of a war.
I think that's true, Jimmy, except for this. China never wants to go to war with the United States. Nobody does, because we will destroy them. That's number one. But number two, if in fact China is found guilty of directly attacking the United States with this virus, I think the penalty for that is simply this. Guess what? You're not getting any payments back from us ever again, because that is a criminal act. It killed Americans, and it's wrong. And I think then we're justified in saying, guess what? You don't get anything from us ever again.
You never mince words, do you, Bazzel Baz? My friend, great to get your insights today as someone who for many years was an officer in the CIA, and you still even do great work without people knowing you're there when you rescue children at Recovery, the Association for the Recovery of Children. By the way, what's the website for that address? We don't have time to get into it today, but I'd love for people to check it out.
Thank you, Jimmy, so much. To www.recoveryofchildren.org.
You want to check it out. What they do in rescuing trafficked children without the captors knowing is incredible. Bazzel Baz, great to check in with you as always, my friend. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jimmy. Peace out.
You as well. And be healthy. Bazzel Baz joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, your home for engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. When we return, what are individual rights? Like, really, what is a right? Where is it derived from? And how should we be thinking about individual rights in the context of the current coronavirus crisis? We will talk with none other than Dr. Tom Krannawitter, PhD, who will join us and dive into this very discussion. He is the president of Speakeasy Ideas, a constitutional scholar and former college professor. Keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain finds himself up against a worthy adversary, a meteor maid.
Oh, come on. I was only in there 2 parsecs.
You can't double park here. You're in a twilight zone.
I didn't see the signpost up ahead.
Plus, your plates are expired.
Hold on. I've got an idea. This is not the double-parked starship you are looking for.
This is not the... Oh, come on, really? You're gonna try and pull mind tricks? What do I look like, a Gungan?
Misa thought it would work.
Here you go, Captain Schnook.
Ah, womp rats. A summons?
See you in court.
You mean I gotta come back all the way across the galaxy? Oh, look. This is right in the middle of Ponfar. And if I miss it, it's another 7 years.
Tough tribbles.
Well, was the captain really parked in a twilight zone? Will there be a twist ending? Tune in next time when we hear...
Look, maybe we can, work something out.
What do you have in mind?
A couple passes to the Space of Palooza Festival, free parking.
I will see you in court. You will pay in full. Sign here, please.
You will see me in court. I will pay in full. I have signed here.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
What the How does she do that?
On Starship Winkler.
Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next! I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy! Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final segment of Jimmy at the Crossroads, let's welcome back your host, Mr. Sang Style himself, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Final segment on the Wednesday, April 15th edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. My thanks to Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic, powering through some of the bandwidth technical issues that occasionally come up in the COVID era when you're doing live streaming. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and it is, as always, such a pleasure and a privilege to bring you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out here on the show. I want to get a little philosophical for a bit here on today's show, because over the weekend, my brother was going back and forth with a work colleague about individual rights and the role of government and so forth, which, by the way, I was so proud of him for some of the arguments that he was making. But it really struck in me a reminder of how little Americans really understand about what individual rights really are and how they're derived, which is so important, so crucial for every American to understand at this point in time when we are looking at questions of civil liberty abounding right now over the coronavirus pandemic. So who better to talk to than the president of Speakeasy Ideas, a constitutional scholar, a former professor, and the director of the Defenders of the Declaration program at the Leadership Program of the Rockies, Tom Krannawitter. Dr. Tom Krannawitter, PhD, joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Hey, Jimmy, how are you? Thank you for having me.
You know, I'm doing very well. And before we jump in, I want to ask you a two-part question. One, how are you doing amidst everything? And two, tell us a little bit about Speakeasy Ideas. Give you a chance to fill us in. It looks like, there we go. We have freezing again here. Having some issues systemically. Cutting in and out a little bit. Tom, go ahead. I think we're better now.
Yep, I can hear you now.
Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about Speakeasy Ideas.
Oh, Speakeasy Ideas is my business that I founded after a career in the academic world, and it's all about ideas. It's about taking the most important ideas, packaging them up, bundling them, presenting them in ways that are useful for ordinary citizens. I mean, it turns out ideas are the most valuable things, the most important things in the world, and getting the ideas right is really everything, because there are incredibly beautiful, helpful, useful ideas like the idea of individual freedom, the idea of property, the idea of the rule of law. These all begin as ideas. There are also terrible ideas out there. Karl Marx, for example, offered all kinds of ideas that led to the most murderous regimes in the world. So we want to make sure and get the ideas right, which is what we do at Speakeasy Ideas.
And let's jump into a critical idea, as I set up, the notion of individual rights, because you ask people a lot, what are rights? What are your rights? And they may list off some examples. You know, we've got a right to free speech, a right to freedom of religion, we've got freedom of the press, and list those off. Or they may say we've got a right to health care and education, right, so on and so forth. But some of those are examples of rights, others are counter to the idea of what an individual right actually is. So let's source it for us. First, what is an individual right and where does it derive from?
An individual right is a synonym for an individual natural freedom. If it's a kind of freedom that you have by nature, so you have the freedom by nature to think, right? Your thoughts are yours. You have a right to your thoughts, your opinions. By nature, you have the freedom to speak. You have the freedom to move around. You have the freedom to use your mind to direct your hands to produce things and create things. So you have a right to your property, to the things you create. Individual rights, properly understood, is a synonym for individual freedom, for natural freedom. If you want to know what you have a right to, just ask yourself, what kind of freedoms do you have by your nature? And here I want to sort of tell the story of rights in American history and summarize a big topic in a short period of time. This country was founded on the idea of individual natural rights, right? Natural freedoms. Our freedom, our right to speak, to think, to worship God as we want, to our own property, to associate with our friends and people who want to associate with us. In the course of the 1930s and the 1940s, think of the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal programs. He introduced a new idea into American politics. He said, you know, those rights in the founding, those were great for back then, and we still want to protect them. Here was the interesting thing about Franklin Roosevelt. He never derided the founders. He never criticized them. He didn't challenge them. He said those rights were absolutely the proper thing for the problems they had in their day. And the problem they had in their day was the problem of political tyranny, government tyranny, right? We had a king back then who wanted to send armies and navies over and do all sorts of terrible things. So this was FDR's thesis. When a people are suffering from political tyranny, the solution, it comes in the form of political rights. Political rights solves the problem of political tyranny. So political rights like the right to consent to our government, the right to speak, the right to newspapers to publish freely, all those sort of things. FDR then said, but in the 1930s, our problem, our threat is no longer a political tyranny. Our government is benign. Our government loves us. Our government is staffed with people that we sent there and we selected. And so tyranny comes in a different form, he said, in the 1940s. It comes from big businesses, from big corporations. It's economic tyranny. Now think through his logic. If
There we go. Just mid speech here, we've got cut in and out from Dr. Tom Krannawitter. We're going to get that sorted out, but having some strange connection issues today. Do apologize for that. Working our way right through it. Nathan Matoush, why don't we go and give him a call back real quick? He's, even though it was mid-speech, one thing that he's talking about here is economic rights. And the idea that, or rather economic tyranny, and the idea that businesses and corporations are tyrannical, and that's what we need to worry about. And by the way, businesses and corporations, they don't have the force of force. They don't have a monopoly on force and the ability to say to compel you to take some sort of action. They don't have that capability like government does. So I want to throw that. We've got Dr. Tom Krannawitter back. Apologies there, Tom. Please pick up where you were at after talking about economic tyranny.
Okay, so what FDR introduced to Americans in the 1930s and 40s is this idea that the new form of tyranny comes, it is economic tyrannies, big businesses who are going to determine the conditions of our work and how we live, how we play. And he said the solution to economic tyranny comes in the form of economic rights, meaning rights to things like the right to a house, the right to a job, the right to a certain minimum wage, the right to health care, the rights to economic goods and services. And as he presented this in the 1930s, he said there is no conflict between this new style of economic rights, right to a house, right to health care, right to a minimum wage, and the old-fashioned natural rights, the right to free speech, the right to religious liberty, the right to one's own property. He said they fit together. And when he said that, he wasn't telling the truth, because they don't fit together. You see this in the very obvious fact, if one person has a right to, say, a house, and the person doesn't have a house, but he says, I have a rightful claim to a house, well, that means someone else needs to provide a house. Someone has to buy a house, build a house, produce a house. In other words, government is going to have to take somebody's property to give this person a house. The government's going to have to take property from some to provide health care, right? To hire physicians and nurses for somebody else. Every economic right requires violating the property rights, the natural rights of some. And this goes farther. We see this in modern socialist and communist tyrannies. When a government, let me back up a second. Every modern socialist and communist tyranny, think of communist China, think of the Soviet Union, think of all these grand experiments.
Once again, Dr. Tom Krannawitter is our guest. He is the president of Speakeasy Ideas, which really has some thoughtful work being done on this, also on the issues of individual rights, but also on what happened with slavery, the true story of tragedy and triumph. Slavery has been doing a series of speeches in Colorado about this, now has gone into the online space when it comes to being able to get the message out and educate people about what's happening in terms of what happened in terms of slavery and the true story. Be sure to check out his website. Very interesting content there and opportunities to check out the online events and so forth at speakeasyideas.com. We do have Dr. Tom Krannawitter back on. And before, Tom, I have you go back into your point about the idea of socialist societies and how they've been operating. I just really want to get to unpacking one thing that you kept talking about, which is natural rights and how property and the ability to speak, being free to think, free to act, free to choose, are all natural rights. Define natural rights for just a moment. Just go back to underscoring the point of why it's natural and not something that's just given to us by government.
So a natural right is inherent in human nature. That's why it's a natural right. And so the way to understand this is to think about what a human being is by nature. What is human nature? If you look at human beings, right? They differ in a number of ways. We differ in size and height and skin color, hair color, eye color. We differ in levels of intelligence. There's all kinds of diversity among human beings in many ways. And we all have certain things in common. Every human being is part material, meaning a physical body, right? And some people have more attractive looking physical bodies than some of us, but we all have a physical body. We have skin and hair and bones and blood. We're matter, we're material, and we are something else. There's a part of us that is immaterial, that is metaphysical. Some folks call that a soul. Some folks call it a mind, a free mind. Whatever word you want to give it or label, there is something, there's a part of us that is metaphysically free. And what I mean by metaphysically free, I mean not determined by the laws of physics, right? Metaphysically free, that's the mind that is free to choose, free to think, free to contemplate, reflect, and make choices. So in our nature, my nature as a human being,
apologize, folks. Not sure exactly what's been going on today as far as some of these bandwidth issues here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Okay. Sorry, Tom. You froze up on our side again. So please continue. I'm glad we have you back here. So just go back 30 seconds.
Okay. So my nature is the nature of a being that I have a physical body that is the home to a metaphysical mind. My nature, therefore, nature indicates that my mind should govern my body. Your mind should govern your body. The very idea of self-government is woven right into our nature. Each of us has a right, it is rightful for each of us to govern ourselves. The entire criminal code, think of all criminal laws. The premise is that each person's mind is responsible for what each person's body does, right? Our mind and body should go together. I choose what to do with my body, which is why if I choose to assault someone or steal something, well, the criminal law holds me accountable because my mind governs my body. I have a rightful claim to govern myself. I have a rightful claim to make choices for myself. I have a natural right to live freely, to pursue happiness, right, in the way that I see best fit. This rightful claim, this natural right, is not a gift from any government. It's not a gift from any bureaucrat. It does not depend on any law. In fact, just the opposite.
Dr. Tom Krannawitter, our guest, let me say something and ask you this. And we got him frozen up again, but I think he'll pop back here. Tom Krannawitter, again, is president of Speakeasy Ideas. And one thing that's important to really get at when we're talking about the issue of natural rights is the point that he was making before about economic rights being essentially trampling upon this mythical idea of economic rights trampling upon natural rights. Tom Krannawitter, apologies for not sure what's been going on today with these connection issues, but can you take us to the next step, which is, because I think you laid out natural rights very well, but then go back to the idea of the conflict of economic rights and natural rights, and the idea that if you are forcing, say, a doctor to provide healthcare services, or you are forcing somebody who is you're forcing somebody else to do something or to provide some sort of a good or service, that means you're taking away their natural rights.
Yeah, that's right. Every economic right requires the violation of somebody's natural rights. And a moment before we got disconnected here through the interwebs, I had started to talk about the history of socialist and communist nations. Mm-hmm. Every one of them begins with these promises of economic goods, economic rights. They begin with socialists promising free healthcare, free medicine, right, free housing, free education. Says everybody has a right to these things. And then millions of people, they nod their head and they say, okay, we agree. We'll support you in your power in government if you give us all this free stuff. Now, all of a sudden, the political class has a huge problem on their hand. That is, how do we deliver all this stuff? Government does not have armies of teachers and physicians. It doesn't have houses and cars and computers and all these things that they promised to give away. So how are those in government going to deliver all these things they promised? They have to start controlling and commanding. They have to tell some people, you are going to be a physician.
Let's put up the split screen here. We're going to wait just a moment here. Dr. Tom Krannawitter is our guest. Speakeasy Ideas. Once again, you're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads here on the show. It is always great to delve into depth with our guests and so forth. We've had these intermittent issues, and I cannot explain other than bandwidth what's happening, but I think we've got him again. Tom, I apologize. If you'd like, we can switch over to telephone and put up your picture, and we can allow you to continue that way, or we can keep powering through a few more minutes. All right, so we'll go ahead and get Tom Krannawitter on the phone. You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do the phone.
All right, so we apologize. We'll get Tom Krannawitter back on via the telephone. Sometimes this happens in the COVID-19 era. That's how things go. So Nathan's going to be calling him up, getting him going here on Jimmy at the Crossroads via the telephone. You got the number there. Oh, right, we don't specifically have the phone number for Tom here. So Nathan will work his Matouche magic and get that going here as we march along on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Again, here's the reason why I wanted to go over the natural rights question and the notion of individual rights. And that is because here right now, in the middle of this coronavirus crisis, people are not paying attention and do not know and understand what their rights are. And the notion that it's not just we are given certain rights, but we have natural rights, and that these are not to be subjugated by government in order to provide so-called economic rights to others. And it's a critical point, and also a critical point to keep in mind when we're talking about power. The power structure here, where government is able to force certain things, force these shutdowns and what have you. And we need to keep in mind and understand and know what the nature of individual rights are. So it looks like here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, via the telephone, we now have Dr. Tom Krannawitter. Tom, can you hear me okay, my friend?
Jimmy, I am, and I'm feeling very retro being on I'm not only on a phone, I'm on a phone with a cord connected to it. How about
Whoa! This is like, are you from was that like 1800s kind of stuff, or is that a little too soon here for what's going on?
That's right. Well, Abraham Lincoln invented the telephone, didn't he?
Yes, just like Al Gore invented the internet. So that's exactly right. Exactly right happened. So here's what I was just kind of saying there where we were getting you on, is why I think it's important we're talking about this natural rights discussion. So very briefly, why don't you encapsulate the points that you've made, and then we can expand from there.
So the most fundamental rights, the first rights, the most important rights for human flourishing are individual natural rights. And it's an old-fashioned term. We don't use it much anymore, natural rights. And what it means these rights are inherent in our nature. When I say natural rights, it's a synonym for individual freedom, the things you have the freedom to do by nature. What can you do by your nature? You can think, you can speak, you can walk around, you can use your hands and make things and do things. Those are the things you have natural rights to. You don't have a natural right. You have no rightful claim to someone else's person, to someone else's body, to someone else's labor. So anything that requires another human being. So a house, right, requires other people to build it. Healthcare requires physicians and nurses and medical technicians to do all kinds of things. One cannot have a rightful claim. One cannot have a right to healthcare or to a house or to an education, because one doesn't have a rightful claim to the person and the property and the labor of other people. We have a natural right, a rightful claim by nature to what is ours by nature. And what is ours by nature is our body, our mind, and our labor. That's what we have a natural right to.
And so when that comes into conflict with government decisions on providing certain economic rights or restricting certain kinds of activities, How do you balance that? I mean, the basic idea in my mind is, look, we have a criminal justice system specifically because if I violate your rights by assaulting you or harming you or stealing something from you, that means that I have trampled upon your individual rights, and therefore government exists to intervene at that point in time or to protect your property and what have you. But then we get to a point where they start saying, no, we need to have government do a little bit more. Maybe we need government to shut down certain businesses. We need to quarantine certain individuals. We need maybe certificates of immunity for people to walk around, as Anthony Fauci has floated as a possible idea that the government's considering, and what have you. These are instances where government policies can come into direct conflict with individual natural rights.
Yeah, in fact, you put your finger on something really important here. When we have a politics based on natural rights, that is the politics of the Declaration of Independence, the politics that emerged out of the American Revolution, then the law is used to punish injustice, right? So say the criminal code you just mentioned, the law punishes people who steal or assault others or murder others or do things like that, right? The law is in the service of justice by punishing injustice. However, the moment we start to adopt a politics of economic rights, once Americans start to agree, yeah, we think we have a right to health care, and we have a right to a house, and we have a right to education, then all of a sudden we change the nature of law. Law, rather than being on the side of justice, law starts to be used for injustice. We start to legalize taking property from some people in order to transfer it to other people. And that's the terrible situation we're in right now. We have a very confused kind of politics, because on the one hand, many Americans think that they do have a right to their own property, and they want the laws to protect their property. And they're right. They do have a right to their own property. And many of those same Americans in the next breath will say, and I think people have a right to health care. Well, for government to provide health care, it's going to have to take property. It's going to have to violate the property rights of many in order to offer it to others. And this points to one of these fundamental core concepts that when you first hear it, it almost seems boring. It seems trivial. It seems uninteresting, and yet so many Americans don't get it. And that is the fact that government creates no wealth at all, zero wealth. If we really think about what wealth is, and I want to distinguish, I'm not talking about money, right? Money is a currency, cash, right? They can turn on the printing presses and print more money. That's not the same as wealth. Real wealth, meaning things that you can have that other people value, that other people are willing to pay for or trade for. It could be physical items that you have. It could be talent. It could be knowledge. It could be skills that you have that other people value. That's wealth. How is wealth created? Wealth is created when a person gets off his butt and uses his brain and uses his hands and does something that other people value, right? So if I build a house and others want a house, they're willing to pay for a house, I've created wealth for myself by doing something that other people value. Now think about government. Government has three basic powers, right? Everyone learns this as a kid. Legislative power, executive power, judicial power. That's why the government is divided into three branches. What is the legislative power? It's the power to pass laws. And what do most laws do? Laws are commandments that typically say thou shalt not. It's some kind of restriction, some kind of prohibition. The executive power is the power to enforce those laws, to make sure that people are not doing whatever the law says they're not supposed to do. And the judicial power is the power to judge when there are accusations that some people have violated the laws. They have to sit and judge, did this person actually violate the law? In that whole process of government, making laws, enforcing laws, and judging whether laws have been violated, zero wealth is created. Computers are not built. Food is not grown. Medicines are not invented. Houses are not designed. The things that we value aren't being created by government. So when government says, we'll supply you food, or we'll supply you with health care, we'll supply your medicines, the government has to take that from somebody. And that's why every promise, every entitlement, every economic right promised by government requires violating the natural rights, the property rights of others.
So Dr. Tom Krannawitter, our guest, president of Speakeasy Ideas, just a few minutes left with you. Talk about individual rights in your view in the context of the coronavirus pandemic that we're seeing right now with various restrictions predominantly placed by the states as opposed to the federal government. President Trump has, notwithstanding his comment a couple of days ago about total authority, which he's clarified, he has basically said the states, using general police powers, have the authority to do these quarantines and economic shutdowns, that he hasn't moved forward with it himself nationally and is unlikely to force a reopening himself, but states have taken it upon themselves. And individual rights are still important, whether it's a state or federal government. State governments just have a little bit more authority directly over the people with general police powers, for example, than the federal government. But what do you make of individual rights in the COVID era?
Well, so, it's an interesting thing. There's so many things there that you just brought up.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating thing, that whole constitutional question of national power versus states' power. And you are right constitutionally. You nailed it dead on, that the national government does not have those general police powers. Those are reserved to the states. And so it really is Trump was mistaken constitutionally when he said he has total power. However, there's this wrinkle, there's this interesting rub. When states and cities and other organizations start crawling on their knees to the government, begging for funding for everything, all of a sudden, this is not a constitutional question. This is just a question of leverage and dependency, right? You can't be dependent on someone to feed you and be independent from their control. And so that's the tough situation states are finding themselves in. Yes, states have this constitutional latitude that the national government does not. However, the states also receive all kinds of funding and grants from the federal government, which gives the federal government all kinds of extra constitutional power and influence over states to really dictate what the states may and may not do. In terms of individual rights, look, the government, those in government, if they want to listen to medical experts and listen to mathematical modelers, and then they think they have some advice to offer to citizens, they are perfectly free to offer that advice and say, here's what we think would help you be safer, healthier, better protected. But in the end, their job is to protect our freedom, our natural right to govern ourselves. It is not to be our lords. It is not to be our parents, and that is the kind of role that many governors and state legislators are assuming. We are seeing a complete violation of individual rights. In fact, I suspect, from people like Dr. Fauci up there at the national level to many governors across the country right now, it's become clear that this idea of individual rights is not even on their radar. This is not something they think about. This is not something that concerns them. What they think that their populations, the populations around them, that these are social engineering experiments, and they'll decide where people can and cannot go, when they can go, what they may or may not do. It's the opposite of a government designed to protect individual rights.
Well, Tom Krannawitter, let me ask you this, and that is, when it comes to individual rights, obviously there are infringements that we're seeing. However, at the same time, the counter-argument may be, if I get the coronavirus because you have it and you were irresponsible and reckless, and then I get the virus and then I die, you put my right to life at risk, and ultimately that took my right to life. And therefore, the idea of taking these steps for public health is in pursuit of the fundamental right to life that we are all entitled to, and therefore some government actions are appropriate. You say what, Dr. Tom Krannawitter?
I say that if I come and, if I assault you, Jimmy, and I bind you down, and I know that I have coronavirus, and I purposefully, cough and sneeze all over you to give you this virus. I clearly, the criminal law can rightfully punish me for doing that. But each of us has a natural right and a natural responsibility, a natural duty to take care of ourselves, to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves best that we can. So when there are dangers out in the world, such as communicable diseases, and we need to remember there have been, there are, and there always will be many other communicable diseases other than COVID-19 and coronavirus. Knowing that that's out there, free citizens have the freedom to take whatever measures they want to protect themselves. I'll give you an example. My parents neither of them are young, neither of them are in great health, and they live in another state, and I was supposed to visit them a few weeks ago. So I called them, and I said, I don't think I have this. I don't feel sick, but I know that people can carry this virus without symptoms, and I don't want to bring this to you guys. I don't want to get you sick. And they agreed. They thanked me. They said, let's just hold off on that visit until things seem to settle down and it seems safer. We made a decision. They have chosen. They're hardly ever leaving their house. They're basically, isolating themselves because they're free, responsible citizens. That's the model right there of what citizens should do. If I run my business, which I'm doing right now, that doesn't threaten you. That doesn't violate your rights. You are free to do whatever you choose to do to protect yourself and take care of yourself. But your right to take care of yourself grants to you no authority, and that includes if you're sitting in a governor's chair. It grants to you no authority to command everyone else to stop the work of life by threat of punishment or being thrown in jail.
Dr. Tom Krannawitter, there are a lot of different directions I could take that, but instead, here's what I want to do to wrap things up. You mentioned Dr. Anthony Fauci before. I want to play a clip. This is him on Friday in an interview with CNN's Allison Camerata in the morning on Friday, where he talked about the idea of basically Americans having to potentially walk around with papers demonstrating immunity to the novel coronavirus.
People. Can you imagine a time where Americans carry certificates of immunity?
That's possible. I mean, it's one of those things that we talk about when we want to make sure that we know who the vulnerable people are and not. This is something that's being discussed. I think it might actually have some merit under certain circumstances.
Okay.
It seems like he was trying to weave his way around that, but it might have some merit in some circumstances. I mean, when I heard that, I was like, the civil libertarian in me was like, whoa, hold on, Dr. Fauci, no way.
You're right, and let me offer the counter model, the counter model of free self-governing citizens. The counter model would be citizens decide what they want to do for themselves, and I can imagine someone saying, hey, I am at high risk, so I am going to stay in my house most of the time. And if you want to come into my house for any reason, even as a friend, you have to show me papers that you're immune, and otherwise you're not invited in. I could imagine people doing that with their own businesses, sure, which is their property. If they wanted to, if they want to say, hey, before you walk in the door of my business, you have to show proof that you're immune. Someone can do that with their own property, and then they get to choose with whom do they want to associate. I can choose what businesses I want to go into, and what friends I want to go see or invite over to my house. Mm-hmm. That's the freedom model, rather than the government, requiring that everyone go get these tests and carry around papers as if we're back in Germany in the 1930s.
Yeah, I think that is well put about the difference between how a free society would handle this notion of certificates of immunity versus the prospect. And this is what I think Fauci and Camerata both had in mind of the government mandating that kind of certification. Dr. Tom Krannawitter, thanks so much for your extensive time today, as well as powering through some of these technical issues. You never know what will happen when you're doing live streaming, and I appreciate it, and certainly do encourage folks to check you out at speakeasyideas.com.
Thank you, Jimmy. Have a great rest of your day. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You as well. Stay healthy and well. Again, Dr. Tom Krannawitter joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Well, that is it for us today. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to have an interesting conversation about the role of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, in approving drugs like hydroxychloroquine, for example, for safety but not efficacy. Dr. Jeffrey Singer of the Cato Institute will join us. He is a medical doctor. Get his thoughts on that tomorrow and more. And we appreciate you joining us. Stay healthy and stay well. Keep on keeping on. Keep fighting for liberty and freedom as well, because we cannot allow that to perish. As Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Once again, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. My thanks to our partners at the Washington Examiner, to our guest today, and to producer Nathan Matoush. As always, God bless America.